All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from the Patreons. Lots of gems, lots of long-ass polls, lots of, hey man, you having plateau in your training, I got some advice for you. If you can't pocket, fuck it. And if you can't fuck it, fuck it. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
Sifu, I'm good.
You Gucci?
And you?
I'm doing great, man.
Gucci Swayze.
Yeah, I'm, working on my BUG book, as I've been talking about for a while, but now that I think recently,
Have you
because
come up with the title yet?
we've already had this discussion multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
All right, yes.
Is it Thrusting Fingers?
What? Yeah, it's called Thrusting Fingers. All right?
Again, no.
Thrusting Fingers.
All right. No, it's
Thrusting
not that.
Fingers.
It's just going to be called The Third Form.
That's
That's
right,
one of the
that's right. I
videos from the
remember now,
OnlyFans
yes.
channel.
Yes. Yeah, the Thrusting Fingers explanation, I think, is for when KFG goes on OnlyFans, right? So anyway, because we are working on a new project, which is to turn some of
Turn the beat around.
my previously published books into audiobooks, because people have asked, my books, although it's a little weird because most books that are audiobooks
Wow.
are usually novels or
Love
nonfiction, right?
audiobooks.
Yeah, but the issue is it's a martial arts instructional, so there are a lot of photos, say in the wooden dummy book. So it's a little challenging because I don't want to be like, okay, well, in this photo, I'm hitting the shit out of the dummy. In the next photo, even more so, right? So, but there's enough text in it that I can, yes, sorry?
No, it's just the way you said it. I was like, are we still on the OnlyFans? Like, I am
Watch
just
Sifu Richter hit the shit out of the
hitting
dummy.
the
Oh my
shit out-
God.
Oh my God.
He's just having his way with it, right? So anyway, but there's enough text in the book that I think
Okay.
it warrants me just reading it. Also because people
Mhm.
want to hear maybe what some of the Cantonese sounds like. Not that my Cantonese pronunciation is perfect, but there will be maybe a better approximation than most people who
This is
don't have
exciting.
access to it. So we're starting that, and I think when we started, we recorded like the first 3 chapters, and then it just
You two
put,
guys.
yeah, just put me
Ah.
on this like, okay, you know what? I need to like step on the gas pedal to get the BUG book done.
Uh-huh.
So I've been chipping away at that thing, and it's a matter of
gained a
when I
lot of momentum.
open the InDesign file
Yeah.
to work on the book.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I need to do the book. Then I leave the InDesign open. So every time I go to my computer, it's open.
It's
So I
ready.
do a little bit and then save and then a little. So now I'm in that
Ah.
phase right now. So the BUG book is gonna get done.
Snowball.
So
effect, baby.
yeah, and I'm super excited about the BUG book. So yeah, we're also doing audiobooks. So we'll figure out how that works. I don't know what the timeline is for those. We're starting with the dummy book because it's the longest in terms of text.
Okay.
And we will see how that works out. I still need to figure out, am I going to narrate the form? Am I going to say that, like, for example, with the wooden dummy form, say the 116 dummy techniques listed out?
Count 'em off.
Am I
Yeah.
going to do like 2 versions, like say the movements at the kind of follow along pace and maybe say the movements at the regular pace, so people could listen to the audiobook while practicing and then do it while I say the names of the
Hey,
movements.
if people are listening to the audio book on a phone, right?
Yes.
You could actually, kind of, do the
Wait.
wooden dummy video.
God, now you're just making this
Yeah.
project
No,
even
but-
bigger and bigger.
Wait, is this
Just
unprecedented?
suggesting.
Like, this has never been done, right? This audiobook.
Precedented, not
Precedent.
precedented.
I didn't say precedent.
Unprecedented is what we have going on now in our country.
No.
Precedented is something
Unprecedented.
slightly different. Yes.
Is
yes, yes,
this
yes. Well,
like-
I don't know. I mean, there are other martial art audiobooks, but I don't know if
It's a Wing Chun audio.
I'm sure they are. I'm just like specific. I don't know. I don't care about being the first to do anything. I just
Okay.
want to do good work. That's all I care about.
All right.
I don't care if I'm the first. That's not a big deal for me. There are a lot of there was a Wing Chun Sifu who posted on his social media the other day that he's the first Wing Chun Sifu ever to pose with the Bacham Do in New York's Times Square. And like and that instructor is not local to New York or whatever. And it's funny because my school is like literally 2 blocks away from Times Square.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah,
did
well, I
that.
guess he's the first to do it, right? Is it? It's like I mean, you are undoubtedly the first Wing Chun Sifu to be a co-host on a podcast from New York City. I mean, like, stretch it any way you want. You can make any first you
Any
want,
first,
right?
yeah.
Okay, it's like kind of ridiculous, and
Oh,
people
great.
get so excited about themselves to be the
Uh.
first to do anything, right?
This is,
You know what? I'm gonna borrow the Bat Jam dough, and I'm gonna go to Times Square, and I'm gonna be the first English Wing Chun primary technician practitioner, like to pose
And
with the
then
Bat
post
Jam
it.
dough.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Knowing the form at all,
Not having
because
learned the Bat Jam
No,
Dough, but
because-
yeah, see,
but I'm gonna do
you
it.
could just
though.
keep adding to that, and then you'll
Yeah,
be the new
I'll be
first,
first.
right? Yeah.
Someone beat that.
So anyway, before we get started, just want to remind everyone that the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon. Patreon.com/the Kung Fu Genius. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to episodes early, higher levels of support, get all sorts of goodies and cool special stuff on our Patreon. We also have YouTube memberships here where we have special videos, and that only go to the YouTube members and to the Patreons up to a certain tier, or after a certain tier, I should say. So you can support us either on Patreon or here on YouTube memberships. And if you don't want to support us anywhere there and you want to do a one-time donation, we have our PayPal information there below, and you can give us the best nation, which is the donation. And that's all. So Dre, what do you got for me today
We got a few questions from the Patreon.
from the Patreon?
Yeah.
All right. go
Not
with it.
to mix or not the expatriates or the expats, not them guys. Oscar
Expats.
Menendez.
Oscar Menendez.
Hello, KFC and crew.
Did you just call me
Ah,
KFC?
That's what he wrote.
All right. Okay.
No, he didn't say that.
All right.
No, I read it as KFC.
Okay.
Kung Fu children.
Kung Fu
Wu-Tang
Child.
for the children.
Yeah. Kung Fu Child also describes
Kung
me.
Fu
It's
Child.
quite an apt
That's
description of me.
interesting.
I
Hello, KFG and crew. What have been some of the techniques you have used to overcome getting stuck on a plateau in your WCVT journey?
All right. Cool that he says WC and VT, as I don't practice either one of those, but do WT. Anyway, that's just me being a stickler for spelling. I don't know. In my WC and VT training, it's
Yeah.
not
very minimal.
It's very minimal.
The
Yeah.
KFC is snarky today.
Yeah.
Sorry, the KFG.
Well,
The
KFG.
That's
KFG is being a
that's what you get for
KFC.
calling me the KFC off the gate. All right. And then he asked me how I've broken plateaus in two acronyms for Wing Chun that I don't use.
Right.
No, anyway, all jokes aside. So this is a common question, and it's difficult to answer because it depends on the school. All right. So certain martial arts schools, let's just talk about Wing Chun. They're very, very traditional. And in some of those traditional schools, I can imagine that it's very easy to feel like you are stuck, because being stuck at a certain level is not a bug, it's a feature of a lot of traditional martial arts schools. You stay at this level because you have to polish your basics until you get to a certain point before you can learn the next set of basics or the next form or the next Chi-Sao progression, whatever it is. So
The beauty.
in some very traditional Wing Chun schools, those plateaus where you're just not doing anything else are built in. Okay. Because they spend a lot of time working on fundamentals and polishing those fundamentals before they learn or teach their students the next thing. And there's advantages and disadvantages of every system. Okay.
Mhm.
So if you teach things a little more progressively and a little more in a modern way, where you maybe don't make the students wait forever before they learn the next thing, that style is great for keeping people a little bit more interested. But then, of course, the issue you run into is that sometimes beginners or intermediate students may be learning something that they haven't done enough. They haven't dug the well of those fundamentals deep enough to be able to do the next thing. So sometimes it actually creates a somewhat slower progression, even though the student feels that they're learning more because they're being introduced to more. But then you always have to go back and then work and clean up and work
yeah.
those things out. You know what I mean? So that's why in a
Iron out.
modern teaching system where you maybe teach things slightly faster than in the old days, instructors have to get really good at what we call disguised repetition. So
Okay.
you
Yes.
teach them perhaps a little bit faster than in the old days to keep the interest there. But while you're teaching them new stuff or introducing them new things, you are still reviewing the basics. You're still making sure that they're getting plenty of practice and repetitions in the
Like
stuff they already did.
Like the Chi-Sao fundamentals in the
in the intermediate and advanced classes, right? Yeah, so they're learning the advanced Chi-Sao, but every warm-up in the Chi-Sao section, they're doing fundamentals, right? So it's like they're still doing it. So that's exactly like an example of that. Or, finding other ways to drill the stuff they've done before, but it's a new way of doing it, so it doesn't feel like they're doing the same thing, right? So within a school structure, if you're in a school that teaches things more progressively or maybe a little more faster, then those schools, in order to keep those students from plateauing, because you can plateau because you're just learning stuff too quickly, all right? Then you want to make sure that in those schools, there's plenty of disguised repetition where you're still going back to the well of basics, you're still polishing them up. And as you get better at basics and you can start to consolidate all these different pieces of your fundamentals into something organic and whole, you will start to see that the new stuff you're learning is starting to catch up, because now those fundamentals that were required to be good at those things are starting to get built up from underneath, right?
Okay.
In a very traditional school where you only stay at fundamentals for a very, very long time, the plateau may feel different, all right? Because in the school where you learn things faster, the plateau may be that, oh, I'm not getting any better at Chi-Sao because there wasn't enough time in fundamentals. You got to wait for those fundamentals to catch up for the Chi-Sao to hit its stride, right? But yet in another school, the plateau might be, I'm just not learning anything new, or I'm just not doing anything that feels like it's giving me a new look, right?
Okay.
And that's where I would suggest that instructors who teach things in a very traditional way also use disguised repetition. So it's like, okay, if you're going to make the students training super, super basic, where it's just steps and punches or just turning or just whatever basics for months on end before they learn the chumkyu or whatever it is, then you need to make sure that you find many different drills to show that same material from different aspects. Solo exercises for footwork, partner exercises for footwork, footwork exercises for time, footwork exercises for reps, footwork exercises with equipment, footwork exercises with the dummy, or footwork exercises with cones, or whatever, so that they're doing the same stuff, but you give them a different look so that it doesn't feel as repetitive and as boring. And you may find that, like, oh, when you finally had to do a circling exercise with cones, it made you understand why we even have to circle to begin with, right? So these different ways of putting different looks on the material is a great way to feel like, okay, you can push those plateaus, whether it's a more traditional style where they're just doing the same thing for, months and months and months, do the same thing, but do it in different ways. And then the same thing for those who learn a little more quickly, make sure that there's still plenty of fundamentals that are being trained with disguised repetition, so it doesn't seem so boring, to support those more advanced things that they're learning so that they can catch up. Now, so those are kind of my two bits of advice. Those are more for instructors, though,
I see.
to make sure that stagnation doesn't happen in their own schools.
Right.
The difficulty is when you're a student and you have to go to a school and the school just teaches the way they teach.
And you're just learning, you kind of don't know how to approach that plateau. I see.
Yes, but the other issue is that you just may be going to a school where the instructor doesn't think about that stuff. The reason why you're learning it in this way is because that's how they learned it and that's how they're going to teach you.
Okay.
So that's the problem with something like, if you look at something like personal training, okay, and you look at how personal trainers did stuff like in the 80s, all right? And then you look at how the better personal trainers do stuff now. There's a lot more science behind it. And so while, yes, a personal trainer from the 80s and a personal trainer from, 2025 may still just be there counting off repetitions of bench press, but the new trainer is, of course, the lousy and great trainers in all eras, but I'm saying, like, an average to good trainer in the 80s versus like an average to good trainer now. The average to good trainer now, if that bench press isn't really hitting for you to either, you're not getting stronger, or if you're doing it for aesthetics and your chest isn't looking any better, the new trainers have like 15 more ways that they can train your chest.
Right.
You see what I mean? Like, okay, well, maybe dumbbell, maybe the barbell isn't, maybe we do dumbbells instead, or maybe dumbbells and bands, or maybe we use the machine, or maybe we're going to do bands for this thing and dumbbells for this thing, right?
Mm.
They understand that because there's so much more sports science available, you have different ways to teach it. Wing Chun people and Kung Fu people in general are convinced that because something was taught a certain way for however long they imagine it, that must mean that that's the right way. And there's actually nothing to and I know I say this at the point of sounding like a heretic, right? Because in traditional Chinese martial arts comes with it comes all the trappings of organized communities. It comes with some of the negative sides of cults and high control groups. And it also comes with an extremely traditional and conservative mindset, which that the way that it came to us is perfect and it cannot be changed.
Okay.
In no other endeavor in our lives, whether it's how we use our phones, whether it's medicine, whether it's technology, in none of these fields are we constrained by how it was always done. Imagine, you have your Nokia flip phone from back in the day,
Oh
and
yeah.
we're like, no, that's how phones are done. And now we still have the same phone, right? We don't have these manacles in any field of our life, except in traditional martial arts and traditional Chinese martial arts in particular. Now, of course, there are many modern and progressive schools that don't fit into, like, what I'm doing is a bit of a generalization,
Mhm.
but we're always propped up with, well, if it was good enough for Yip Man, it must be good enough for you. And the thing is that we don't really know that. And the science would probably tell us that there most likely, in the time of Yip Man, was a better way to teach Yip Man in a way that he would have learned more quickly or in more in depth if you took some of the manacles and shackles off of traditional Chinese culture that force students to kind of, there's like almost like a hazing process. And then you got to be around for a while. You got to bring your sifu out for dim sum to learn theory or whatever. What if these things were systematized and you say, I don't know, learn theory, a little bit of theory in every class instead of maybe occasionally when you bring your sifu out for dim sum? What if that was standardized? What if when you learned a certain amount of chi sao, you were taught the corresponding theory then and there in the class and that was standardized? You can't tell me that the way it was done back in the day before, they understood modern teaching models, before they understood sports science. The fact that something has been done a certain way or that it was done a certain way from someone doesn't mean that it was the best way. Because in no other aspect of life do we do it like that. It's just when people want to make a claim about the art. Okay, now we're talking about teaching the art in a traditional way. Okay, now we're putting a value not just in the fighting techniques of the style, but in the framework of how it's taught, in the framework of the relationships with your sifu and si heng, in the framework of doing this thing in some version of what we think is Chinese culture. And then those things are valued, but we cannot make a mistake there. Then it's Wing Chun. Like if we strip down Wing Chun just as a martial art, how it works, how it functions, there's that.
Okay.
But how it's taught classically is Wing Chun plus a bunch of other stuff. It's Wing Chun plus the traditional Confucian hierarchy of Sifu, Si Heng, Si Moi, all that kind of stuff. It's Wing Chun plus the traditional hierarchy of not asking for things that you're not ready for or not even really encouraged to ask questions, period. Okay? It is Wing Chun plus a reticence of asking your Sifu any in-depth questions because they're not willing to give you an explanation. It's Wing Chun plus the need to be close to your trainer and bring them out for lunch so you can pay for them so they can maybe show you some theory on a napkin. Okay?
Ouch.
It's Wing Chun plus whatever baggage your Sifu has from how they learned it. It's Wing Chun plus the baggage of your Si Hengs. It's Wing Chun, it's all of this stuff, and then the culture of the school, the direction of the school. And somewhere in there is Wing Chun as a martial art as itself. But what happens is what we call traditional martial arts or traditional Wing Chun is not really the style or how the style is applied. It's all these peripheral things of the culture of the school, Chinese culture, all these kind of things. And look, I'm very fond of Chinese culture. And at City Wing Chun, we retain aspects of
I
Chinese
think we know
culture,
that. Yeah.
the Sifu, Siheng, all that kind of stuff or
Right.
whatever. But I unshackled a lot of the stuff that I thought was just not necessary. Okay. The kind of weird subservient attitude that students must reflexively have to their teachers.
Okay.
I thought, no, the teacher should be more like a coach.
Yeah.
And doesn't need to be this like, a person who is incapable of making any infallible authority on any of this stuff. We need to take that away from. We need to make martial art instructors a little more human, right? So
Okay.
the problem is that when I get asked the question like, how do you what do you do to get out of plateaus? Well, the question was techniques. This is not a matter of techniques, it's a matter of framework. All right. Because there's no technique unless you're talking about teaching technique or training technique. But if you're talking about techniques like by themselves, they are not the problem. All right. Techniques are a dime a dozen. Wing Chun is not based on techniques, based on principles. But what we're talking about now is the culture of the training in the school.
Right.
And if you are in a school that has a very, very traditional framework, you are not doing traditional Wing Chun as a martial art. You are doing traditional Wing Chun plus all of those other things that come with it. Baggage. The Wing Chun is just a car, and we have tons of suitcases strapped to the
All on
top.
the top.
We got suitcases hanging out the
Stuff
back.
falling
We got
off.
a trailer. We got
Yeah.
shit hanging out the doors.
Oh,
we
man.
got the jacket stuck in the door hanging out. It's
Uh-huh.
Wing Chun plus all these things
Oh,
because
goodness.
while I think it's not correct to unshackle Wing Chun from all Chinese culture because it is a Chinese martial art, I think a lot of the things that give students a difficult time in the general Wing Chun diaspora in terms of like when can they learn and the progression is all this old baggage of like, no, it's a martial art. And although it may be a bit of a caricature, the Chinese Sifu is some version of like a Pai Mei, some version of a gatekeeper, some version of a, I'm this guy, you're that low guy. And this barrier and this idea of Wing Chun Sifu as a gatekeeper, I think is outdated. And I think it needs to die a violent, horrible death for Wing Chun to grow.
Bro. Okay.
Right. And so there are no techniques I can give a student to break a plateau if the culture of their school is not willing to think about those things. If you're in a traditional school where you're just stuck for a very long time, that's not a bug. That's a feature of how they teach. If it's your own school, you can take some of the advice that I gave earlier about the disguised repetition and things like that. But if you're a student and you have to learn within the framework of how things are taught, you may not have enough experience or guidance to figure out how to break that plateau. And nothing I could say here would be specific enough for your specific problem in that situation, right? So I would be more than willing to answer this question again for Oscar if maybe in a follow-up you give me some specific examples of things you're plateauing on. Is it
Ah.
theoretical knowledge or a lack thereof? Is it fighting skill? Is it punching power? Is it what is the plateau? Then
Okay.
I can offer some specific advice. But in terms of general advice, if you're not the teacher or you're not an instructor that's kind of you have enough experience that you can kind of decide how to do things. If you're just following along in a school, it's much more difficult because you have to follow within the framework of classical Wing Chun plus all the other shit that gets appended to it. But great question,
Interesting.
man.
Yeah.
What else you
I
got
would
for
like
me?
to see what he chimes in with.
Yeah, me too.
Hey everyone, just want to let you know Wing Chun Illustrated is now offering a paperback edition through Amazon, reaching a larger global market. And no, they're not ditching the glossy magazine edition through MagCloud. You can now simply choose the version of this magazine you prefer and the one with the cheapest shipping wherever you live. Order your copy of Wing Chun Illustrated today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping for Prime members. Go and check that out.
All right. Next question we have. I love this name. Kung Fu David.
David Nickel. That's our boy.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Cool.
Yes. So he lives in Thailand. He's invited me over there to teach him. He's done an immersion course with me in
I've yet to
Florida.
meet this guy.
Yeah, you haven't met him.
Mikey's met him.
He did an immersion course with me in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
He did one with me in Hong
A
Kong.
lot of immersions.
And he did one with me in Thailand.
He's all immersed.
Yes, he's all immersed. And
Immersed.
did some training with me recently in Germany as well. So he's really into our program, and he's
Nice.
doing very well. What's his question?
Kung Fu David is asking if you would have named your top 5 martial arts styles or systems, what would they be? Anything goes in terms of justification, the shape, the history, the pedigree, the effectiveness. Who is teaching it currently, etc.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's always like those questions like if you didn't do Wing Chun, but you could do any other martial art, what would you do, right? And the thing is, I just simply cannot imagine my life without doing Wing Chun, right? It's like would be like removing some of my limbs. It's like I just don't. It's like I can't imagine my life without it, right? So
really strange.
what I'm gonna do is like top 5 martial arts. I said, man, I hate lists because I'm so indecisive because I love all this stuff. So I'll
to choose.
make two lists. One, let's say for practical, and one for
Just bare bones fun.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And I'm gonna leave Wing Chun out of it because it would be very self-serving. Well, obviously Wing Chun. All right. Okay.
Obvious choice.
So for practical fighting, I would say okay, a couple options, and these are martial arts that I've also taken inspiration from in terms of improving some effectiveness, and it doesn't mean that I'm taking techniques from them. Sometimes you take an idea or a framework that they use and apply that to Wing Chun.
Okay.
So I think that my top 5, if it wasn't Wing Chun,
Start from 5.
all right. No, I'm just gonna.
There's no order.
No, there's no order because it would I would need to sit and put like do pros and cons, and I can't off the top of my head say an order that would be meaningful. It would just be me riffing off the top of my head. And if I took 10 minutes to think about it, I'd maybe like, well, actually, so I'm just gonna say 5. All right. It's not in any order. Okay. For practical fighting. Okay. One, I would say obviously jujitsu.
Yeah.
All right. But obviously things that are similar to jujitsu, like sambo and stuff like that. Like I would include those things in it. Something with wrestling and grappling and submissions. Okay. Second, I would put some form of kickboxing, like Muay Thai kickboxing, or an MMA style kickboxing, not American kickboxing. But like either an MMA style, which is basically modified Thai boxing, or straight Thai boxing. But that could also be a style like Sanda, Chinese Sanda. So I would consider like a powerful kickboxing art, Muay Thai or MMA style kickboxing, or Sanda, or a mix of those. All right. Just like jujitsu or any kind of submission fighting, that kind of stuff. Then wow, it already, like, for me, I'm like kind of like I have to keep going.
All right.
I think boxing, just straight up
Yes.
boxing,
Yes.
is
That's
very,
a great
very
skill,
good
yeah.
martial art.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you're just doing straight up boxing, and you have nothing, you don't do any training against kicks or takedowns, that's going to be a bit of a problem. But a very good boxer with very good boxing skills could adapt some skills of anti-wrestling or anti-kicking if they train it. But boxing on its own is really quite good. I would also say, in terms of like
Taibo?
that's a fitness sport.
Hmm.
All right. I
Is
would
that for real?
Krav Maga.
I would say then, okay, so we have 3 now, right?
Yeah, great.
Then I would say Kyokushin karate for people who wanted like a really hardcore but still traditional martial art. Definitely Kyokushin Kai. And then let's see what else out there is really good. Well, I mean, for self-defense, like if we just talk about self-defense and we look at those combative martial arts, okay, like the self-defense combatives, things like Krav Maga or all those like special things. I think Tony Blauer's spear system is probably the best of those things.
What about Gun Fu? That would
Yes.
be in my top 5.
Yes, that would be your top. It would be all 5 spots. Gun Fu, right? To use a gun, right? So I think that Tony Blauer's spear system,
Tony
in terms of
Blauer,
like if you
okay.
only care about self-defense, like your interest is not sport fighting or martial art or any of those kind of things, right? You just want like, okay, if someone attacks me, like
Is spear an acronym?
Yes,
Okay,
it's
gotcha.
an acronym for something, and
Mhm.
actually uses a very similar idea like our wedge, but with a slightly different, like to go in kind of behind a triangle, more or less.
Mhm.
Okay, so the first one, obviously, jujitsu, sambo, some kind of submission wrestling, grappling, stuff on the floor, takedowns, defending positions, escapes. Some kind of premier kickboxing, whether it's MMA style, Muay Thai, Sanda, straight up boxing. All right. Obviously, the caveat in boxing is you need to figure out something against kicks and wrestling, right? I mean, by the way, obviously, a kickboxer would also need to worry about the wrestling stuff, and a jujitsu person would also probably should learn some kind of striking there as well. Then Kyokushinkai karate. It's very powerful and very no nonsense, but traditional style of martial arts. And then the fifth one to kind of, to put a pure self defense one in there, I would say something like the spear systems. I would do something like that over Krav Maga, and the reason is because and this just look, and it's not any diss on Krav Maga. There's lots of really good Krav Maga guys out there, and there's a lot of really bad Krav Maga guys out there. Just like there's a lot of really shitty Wing Chun, and there's some okay Wing Chun. There's some good Wing Chun, mostly shitty Wing Chun. All right,
Right.
some good Krav Maga, a lot of really terrible Krav Maga. Right.
Okay.
But Tony Blauer's spear system, he manages the whole thing. So everyone who does it does it. There's no like 10 different schools of that system. It's just the one
Right.
style, right?
Got it.
And the reason why I think that Tony Blauer's system is maybe a little superior if you're just looking for self-defense. Of course, my experience with it's somewhat limited, and Dr. Kenneth J has done it before. Is that it's a style that's based on all the stuff that you need for self-defense, like the fact that we flinch. All right,
Yeah.
that's a thing that happens. All right, we talk about it in Wing Chun when we talk about self-defense. The spear system is based on those kind of initial flinch responses and changing it into something that's a little bit more useful, right? It's kind of takes what is the normal psychology, what's the normal physiology of people when they're in a violent encounter, and let's start with okay, that's what happens. Then what? Then what can you do from there? So
Mhm.
that's why I think it's better. Whereas I see a lot of Krav Maga is like techniques. If the guy grabs you like this, you do this. If the guy punches you, you do this. And then so what it is you're learning a technique for every different situation. But if you're doing something like the spear system, you're learning principles that you can do that you don't have to remember a 20-step process to get out of a wrist grab or something like that,
Okay.
right? Not saying Krav Maga is a 20-step process, and just saying like it's not that move 1, move 2, move 3, right? It's very straightforward stuff. So that would be my top 5 on the more kind of practical end of things.
Now we got the fun food.
Yeah, now in terms of martial arts that I think are either they're just cool as martial arts because they have an aesthetic, they look good, maybe they're good for fighting on film, maybe they're like rewarding in terms of practice or whatever. For whatever reason, I just think like they're good. Okay.
Okay.
First of all, the the previous 5 that I mentioned, you could also put them into this category. I mean, like most people only really love the martial art they do, and they think everything else kind of sucks. And when it comes to Wing Chun, most people are like, yeah. And it's not even that they like Wing Chun; it's that they like their Wing Chun and they hate all other Wing
Oh
Chun, right?
goodness.
And so I used to be one of those guys, and but now I have an appreciation for good Wing Chun, which could also look different from the Wing Chun that I practice. Obviously I like Leung Ting Wing Chun and the aesthetic when it's done correctly, and I see mostly bad WT when I look online.
Okay.
There's a WT school that is like they're here in the States and they're like kind of emergent in another state, not a competitor at all. Um, but they're starting to do a lot of reels and a lot of online promotion, and you can see that they're doing the stuff like they got some social media person who's like, oh, you should do reels like this and you should do your thumbnails like this. It's very like boilerplate template stuff, but it's terrible when you look at the techniques that they're doing. It's very poorly executed cheese house sections from the Learning system. It's very it's demonstrations that lack a little bit of power and a little bit of oomph. It's very like lackadaisical, and they're getting blasted in the comments. And I look at that and I go, yay, 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 yay. So
Ugh.
I can do something like see within my own lineage the stuff that I think looks awful and is not good. Most people tend to like whatever's their lineage, it's the best, F the rest.
Yeah.
And I'm like, most of what I see in WT, including my old stuff, like before I knew how to present it, I also not a fan of. All right.
I gotcha.
And so, but when I see good Wing Chun, whether it's WT or VT or whatever, I can appreciate it, even if the way they do it is different than how I do it, right? And I would wish and hope that more Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do people can kind of maybe take off the filter of, if you're not doing it the exact way, not just in my lineage, but in my school, that it could also still be good, or you could see valuable things in there without reflexively going, do you see the position of the back foot? Oh, do you see how the stance is? Oh, do you see where the hands are? Like, and all you're doing is making comparisons to the hyper specific way you do it,
Right.
as if that's the only way it's ever been done, and using that as your criteria, and not whether it's good or not. It's just the criteria most Wing Chun people apply to other Wing Chun is, how similar is it to what I do? And in the differences, you go, oh, that's shit. And it would be better if Wing Chun people said, okay, obviously, they do it in a very different way than I do it, or slightly different way. And the criteria cannot be, oh, their bong sao was like this, our bong sao is here, therefore they are wrong. Look at how they use their bong sao. And if it's a different paradigm, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means they're using a different idea, some different rules of engagement, right? And Wing Chun people, as traditional martial artists in general, I think need to like turn off that big, huge bias filter of the way we do it in our lineage is correct, and just look and go, okay, what are the things
Our
this
way or the
person is, what are the things this person is doing that is good? Are they closing the gap in a way where they're protected, right? Are they controlling the person in a certain way? Are they attacking the center? Are they avoiding strikes with footwork or this or that or whatever? And not just go, oh, they're avoiding punches, but not the way we do it, therefore it's wrong. Well, if they're avoiding punches, they're avoiding punches. Okay. And so I hope that Wing Chun people can start to kind of get out of this nonsense a little bit, right? So so leaving Wing Chun out of it, all right. 5 styles that I think are really cool aesthetically.
Tiger style.
The previously 5 mentioned. All right, I dig watching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling. I'm like a lot of people who don't do it. They don't understand. Oh, it's boring, or oh, they're just wrestling on the ground. But when you have when you've seen it and you know what they're doing, you go, oh wow, look at what they're doing here. Look at how he's controlling. Look at how he's stopping the knee from going there.
Yeah.
And you see the kung fu in the jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
All right. Same thing for kickboxing. I mean, there's nothing I love more than to be at a Muay Thai fight, or to be at an MMA match and see really high level striking from a sport base, right? I don't watch that and go, oh, how come he's not chain punching? Or I would just go in and do a pack cell, because that's not what you're watching. You have to appreciate it for what it is, right?
Okay.
Same thing with boxing. Who doesn't like a masterful boxing performance, right? I mean, some of my favorite fights to watch are classic fights, whether it's Tyson or Ali or Sugar Ray Leonard or Roberto Duran or Hagler and Hearns. I mean, like, you know, you can't not watch the first round of Hagler and Hearns and not go, oh, it's wild, but there's something to this that's high level, right? And then, you know, obviously the same thing, even the spear system, the way they use that, even though it's just self-defense, there's an art and a way to it. Kyokushin karate being this brutal full contact karate, but they still have forms. They still have the board breaking. They still have the things that make it like karate, right? And I love that stuff. It's cool, right? It's really, really fun to watch, right? I think in terms of cool martial arts, obviously stuff like Hungar, like especially from Maxifu, all right, or the Lamzhou lineage. When you see the breadth of forms they have, Tiger Crane and Gongji Fukfukun and all the different weapons and all this stuff, and then you look at someone like Maxifu, who's not just a master of his art, but he's also an artist. You know, the way he presents stuff. And you can see it's not just that he holds his hands or his arms or his stance or in the correct position according to Hungar, but it's like you just see like the kung fu is just oozing out of everything that he does. The way he moves, the way he demonstrates. So like everything, and right? So really high level traditional Chinese kung fu, like a style like Hungar. All right, when it's performed by someone by Maxifu, I mean, I can just sit and watch him for hours.
Makes it look so easy.
It's just but it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I also really like traditional, like if we kind of expand this traditional Chinese thing, if we look at the weapon styles, okay, and we look at like people who are adept just at the weapons, all right, and you look at something like spear and broadsword, okay, When you see people who can do like those 2-man sets, especially the interplay between spear and broadsword,
Okay.
I think like, you know, the long weapons and bladed weapons in Chinese martial arts, people who have real experience with that, which is not everyone in Hungar, by the way. I think these are really, really special people. In terms of cool martial arts, I also think that, believe it or not, because I don't always speak the most highly of it, but I think really good Tai Chi or good internal martial arts, not people who believe in all sorts of hokey, mysterious nonsense and chi blasts and I'm going to sit on the couch
Chi
and you come and try to push me and I'm going to put you on the floor. You know, these are just basically mass hypnotism. But I think someone who really has good knowledge of an internal martial art, when they can do it like from a sticking base where they can move you around and stuff, there's a beauty to that. A well played Tai Chi form.
All right.
You know, I think that there's definitely a very, very cool art to that. I think, you know, the only time that I do speak occasionally negatively about some internal guys, it's not all internal guys. It's very, very specific ones. It's the guys who mistake this ability to not be pushed from their space. You know, like, okay, oh, my stance is so rooted, you can't move me and I can move you around. They mistake that for skills in an all-out fight. Okay. And so the reason is that there are a lot of people in internal martial arts who understand that all this cool stuff that they can do, rooting and uprooting someone's stance and moving them around and staying stable and all this stuff is an element of how their fighting style works together, but it's just one part of it. Okay. But there are people who only do that and they don't do like attacks coming at them from distance.
Okay.
From someone who's trying to punch, kick, or wrestle them with no regard for sticking to their arms. It's one thing if we start in this mutually agreed upon starting position, and okay, we're going to push and sway in this mutually agreed upon method. And then now that we're both playing the same game, okay, you're better at me in this game that I willingly partook in. All right.
Yeah.
But if I'm just some guy there and I'm just going to punch you in the face or try to take you to the ground or I'm just going to wail on you and I'm not going to stick to your arms or start in front of you or anything like that. If you have skills to handle that situation, all right, then I think you're more of a complete martial artist. Those guys usually don't go around talking about how badass they are, but it's the Dunning-Kruger syndrome. It's the people who have such little exposure to anything outside of their world that usually have the biggest opinion about what they think they can do. And I know this because for years I used to rent to some Tai Chi guys who did push hands at my school on Sunday night.
Yeah.
And occasionally I would be in on Sunday and I would listen to these guys talk. And this every week it was a different group. And sometimes you would have Bagua people and Tai Chi people and different push hand styles or whatever. And I would just sit there in my office while I'm working on something and I would overhear these guys. And the types of conversations that they would have, so different from the types of conversations we would have in my Wing Chun class. Or
Like
that my students would have, let's say, after class.
Okay.
After class, it would be like, hey, like, can we work on this thing, right? Or, hey, like, man, I'm always getting hit with this one punch. Can we work on that, right? Or like, oh, I'm having a really difficult time dealing with this takedown defense or this kick defense, right? It would be like discussions about the hard problems of training and the things that they're running into and the things they need to improve. I would listen to these guys. Now, mind you, it's definitely anecdotal. I'm not saying that everyone who's into just push hands and that kind of stuff is this way. But these guys came to my school for years. And it was never a Sunday when I came by that I didn't hear what sounded like
absurdness.
Well, it's almost like the level of bravado is bravado. You would imagine 20-year-old guys who are doing MMA would talk like, yo, bro, if dude tries to take me down now, I'm just going to crack him with an elbow and then I'm going to deal. Like, you know, the way a 20-year-old who's just getting his feet wet in MMA, be like, yeah, bro.
I've been there.
Yeah. I remember one time I was at a hibachi restaurant in Connecticut and I was sitting there with one of my senior students at the time. It was like a really, really good fighter.
Do I know this?
And no. He moved a very long time ago. And, you know, at the hibachi table, sometimes you have to share it with another group, right?
Yeah.
And so we're sitting there, and on the other side are these two dudes. They couldn't have been older than 18.
Yeah.
And clearly they had just started learning jujitsu. Because even though we're just eating and we're not like talking about martial arts or anything like that, those two dudes are talking about jujitsu so loud, like everyone in the restaurant hears it. And I gathered
Oh,
that they had
yes.
just started like 3 months prior, so they were very new.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm eating and stuff, and me and my student, we overheard them say like, man, it's totally crazy. Like no one at this table knows because we're so normal looking. Like if we fought anyone here, like we would beat everyone at this table. And my student was kind of laughing
Yeah.
because first of
That's
all,
great.
he had come from Brazilian jiu-jitsu and then started learning Wing Chun from me. He's like, and he whispered over to me like, bro, not even in jiu-jitsu could they do anything to me. They've been doing it for 3 months.
Uh-huh.
And with Wing Chun, no way. Like, but it was funny because it's like the people who are kind of only exposed to something for a short time, i.e. the Dunning-Kruger effect, massively overestimate their abilities. It's like the more sure someone is about how good they are, or what they could do, or how they could beat someone up or whatever, is almost directly proportionate to the degree that they don't have experience outside of their gym. Because the experts, it's like that famous saying, the experts, beginners are full of confidence and experts are full of doubts. You know what I mean? And it's because when you do something long enough, you realize how multifactorial everything is. It's not black and white, how even the best fighter could slip on a banana peel. Even someone from an inferior style could land a lucky punch if you're not paying attention. And then you see all the factors there that a beginner doesn't see. They just go, I do jiu-jitsu, I'll take you down and do this. Even though with their 3 months of training, they might not be good enough to actually do it, right?
Okay.
So some of these internal guys who were renting my space, they don't rent my space anymore. They were like, yeah, well, like, I remember one guy said like, yeah, it's like, and I actually took umbrage to it and got very upset with the guy because I didn't like the disrespect of other martial arts in my school. They're renting my space, right? I'm not responsible for what they're doing, but they're like this one Tai Chi guy, all right?
Yeah.
And mind you, okay, he was in his mid-50s, okay? Look,
Got
I'm
it.
almost 50 myself, all right?
I'm pushing 50 this
But
year,
he was not a strong mid-50s. He was severely out of shape.
Oh no.
He had a beer belly.
Oh man.
He had 2 or 3 different types of male pattern baldness at the same time. He had a porn
3
stash.
different types?
Yeah. Yeah, he had like the bozo the clown and the one in the back and like, some other receding hairline somewhere, right?
Uh-huh.
And he had a porn stash,
Porn stash.
guts, all right?
Uh-huh.
You looked at his hands, didn't look like he trained anything. Like you could tell with his hands, he's never actually like done really hard training.
No.
And I mean, it looks like if you got in a fight with anyone, he'd die of a heart attack first, all right? Just from the fear, all right? And he was there going like, yeah, my teacher, like if he touches your hands, you can't do anything with him. And like, it's like people don't understand. And he's saying it really loud. I always assumed it was to get me to hear. It's like, none of these bullshit martial arts like boxing. And I'm going like, I'm like, wait a minute. First of all, please don't disrespect other martial arts in my school. Second of all, you think, because in their mind, a real martial art is a traditional martial art where you have forms and fundamentals and internal, and you can talk about all this kind of stuff. See, boxers aren't talking about like the alignment of the spine and your qua and your dantian, right? You know what I mean?
No.
So like, because, and it's like, yeah, but all those terms that you think are important happen to be the terms that you talk about in your martial art. And the fact that another martial art doesn't value that doesn't mean it's not real. It's just they have a different framework.
Yeah.
And if you said this in front of anybody with 6 to 8 months of real boxing training, he's gonna run circles around you, right? But it was weird and was like, and you go like, this dude has never put on boxing gloves and had light, friendly sparring with someone who's a boxer. But based on his Tai Chi push hands training, he's saying that boxing is a bullshit martial art, right?
Ooh.
So that's where all my past critiques of internal martial arts, it's not the guys who really do it. It's not the guys who understand that skill is a part of a whole. All right.
Right.
It's the guys who think that push hand skill is the whole.
Oh yeah.
And that being able to dominate someone in chi or sticking hands or pushing hands means that you can nullify a boxer and a wrestler simply by doing that. And I go, maybe you can if you regularly train with a boxer and a wrestler and you know how to transfer those skills into fighting those styles. But if you haven't, it's theoretical. And that's what one of my past issue with those guys have always been. which is why it's probably funny that like, well, my third choice here for cool martial art is Tai Chi or some kind of internal martial art. But I mean the guys who really know what they're doing and
I
don't
see.
have all these big claims and boasts.
Okay, I did one class of Jing Yi during COVID, and everything played out exactly as we discussed on the
Yes.
podcast. Now, I will not go into the full depth of it because it was just, it'll give me cataracts. But right at the end, as we're walking back after this class where we'd done nothing but forms and done no kind of practical things or anything, and where I had been very, very, what's the word, respectful and let them clown me a little bit,
Yeah.
right? With their like, hey, look, I'm all rooted and that. The guys walking back to the class, oh yeah, talking about their Sifu, this guy Jesse, and he's just like, yeah, you know, we've seen him just like throw people of like every style around rooms, man. Like they
Yeah.
just can't touch him with his. And I'm like thinking, have you though? First of all, I don't think he has been challenged by literally everyone from every different style. And secondly, no, it just didn't happen. You know.
Well,
what I mean?
but also what people it's also sampling bias.
Yeah.
When someone comes to a martial arts school, regardless of what their background is, more likely than not, they're interested in seeing something new. It's not that often that they're going there to challenge the instructor, right? So even if someone with boxing training wants to try out like a Xing Yi class, they're doing it because, oh, this is like kind of interesting, right? Like, let me see. They're not going in there, oh, I don't know what these guys do against my boxing. And then they'll stand there, you know, fully respecting that instructor's ability to show them something. And then that instructor moves them around because they're there to see what they're doing. And then that martial arts instructor goes, see what I did to that boxer. You're like, I wasn't trying to box you. That guy's literally standing in front of you, letting you show the thing that you're showing them.
Yeah.
That's literally what happened to
Yes.
me, by the way.
Yes. And
Literally that.
the other thing that bugs me about this guy, is, like the guy who was talking shit about boxing, is he was saying, my teacher this, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And then boxing is bullshit. And one thing that I always noticed is when these guys have this big mouth about how good the style they do is, it's always their teacher who can do it, and it's never them. All right? And then I go, well, then if you can't do it, then why are you even here teaching it?
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Like
teaching.
presumably you should be able to represent the thing that you're trying to teach, right? But anyway, so that was it's funny. My number 3 was like Tai Chi or internal martial arts.
Uh-huh.
And most of the time I've been explaining how much certain segments of
Yeah.
that group piss me off. But
Uh-huh.
but that's what it is, because I know that if people listen to some old episodes, they might be like, but Mr. KFC, you you know, you always say these things about Tai Chi or whatever,
Uh-huh.
right? No, but for me it's like it's kind of like we know McDojo karate,
Mhm.
all right? And then there's kind of like that level, but for Tai Chi. The loud mouths who are not really into it, and then the people who are really into it and know what they're doing, they normally don't talk like that.
Mm.
Usually the high performing members of any art or whatever are not the ones who are talking shit about the other ones. It's always the middlemen or the guys at the bottom of the totem pole who are doing it because of an ego thing or whatever, right? So number 4, I would say wushu. All right. Now
Yeah.
wushu is a performance-based version of Chinese martial arts. And when you watch those guys, I mean, these guys are really high-level athletes. And watching a wushu performance, it's, even though it's not traditional Chinese kung fu, it's kind of a modernized, acrobaticized version of Chinese martial arts. But
All
I
right.
mean, those guys are really amazing,
Fantastic.
right? And then finally, I think for my my last pick, because I already included the practical 5 as could also be on this list as well.
Okay.
Um,
The fun list.
yeah, it's difficult because there are things that are like aesthetically very cool looking, but maybe it's not even a martial art that you can practice. And I know this is going to sound sacrilegious, but when Steven Seagal did Aikido in his
Yeah.
early films,
Okay.
okay? Now I'm not talking about what Aikido is practiced as a demonstration, which is very cooperative. And I'm not talking about those delusional Aikido people that think that they can fight MMA guys. I'm talking about the presentation of Aikido as Steven Seagal did it in his early films when it was new. No one had done Aikido before. You had
Mhm.
the kicks and the punching and everything like that. And there was something about how he did it in those early films
Yeah,
that's
you know
really,
what's wild is when I first wanted to do martial art, I couldn't decide what to do. Then I chose Aikido. It was based on this guy's advice that I met.
Is that
And
guy Steven Seagal?
no, it was a random dude at Bryant Park.
Did he have a ponytail?
No, he did
All right.
not. And then when I started training at the Aikikai, and I was like, it's not the stuff that Steven Seagal does in the movies.
Right, right.
I was like, man,
Yeah,
no.
he was I mean, I have to say, like, as much of like a clown show as Steven Seagal has become in recent
Right.
years. I mean, he is one of the YouTube's biggest lolcows. I mean, like, there's so many videos just like
Oh my God.
trashing him and stuff because he has become something that's lame.
But those early movies,
yeah,
are
and he always,
so
and when you see the
badass.
old interviews, he always was kind of an asshole. I'm
Right.
just talking very, very specifically
Uh-huh.
talking about what he did in those movies. Hard to Kill,
Yeah.
Marked for Death.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
there was something cool because he had strikes, but it was integrated with this like close range grappling and these throws and arm breaks and stuff like that. And I thought that was really brilliant because that gave him something no one else had. And I thought he was really awesome at that time. So those would be my 5 cool, like, you know, so if, you know, Steven Seagal movie Aikido, Wushu.
What would that be called though? If you like,
just call it
let's say-
Steven Seagal's movie Aikido. Wushu, internal martial arts,
the SSMA.
weapons, especially Chinese weapons, spear and sword, and then some very orthodox style hungar. So you can put Choi Lei Fut in there as well.
Oh yeah.
You know, Sifu Brian Cuttle, our good friend, he does some really cool shit. I love watching his videos or showing how to fight with benches and stuff like that. Stuff's badass.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my answer to
Now,
that.
did Steven Seagal choreograph the moves in that movie? In
I
all
think
those
so.
movies?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
All right. What else you
right.
got for me, Dre? Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius. Fans and practitioners all know that the wooden dummy is the most coveted tool in Wing Chun, and now you can learn all about it in my cleverly titled book, The Wooden Dummy. I wrote this guide with you, the practitioner, in mind. Rather than mystifying any of the concepts or hiding so-called secrets, I've laid it all out in meticulous detail. The book is contextualized for practitioners of any lineage of the art, not just those who come from WT. Over 300 pages in length, The Wooden Dummy breaks down every aspect from the form, about technical, historical, theoretical details, and it makes it the perfect companion for anyone who's learning the wooden dummy techniques. I've even sweetened the deal for you. If you want to get a copy of this book signed by me, just use the coupon code SIGNATURE when you purchase the unsigned copy, and you will get the signed copy at no additional cost. So go to the link below or go to citywingchun.com/shop. Look up the Wooden Dummy book. Don't miss your chance. This is definitely one of the best books I've ever written on the Wooden Dummy, and I hope you'll find it's the best book ever written on the Wooden Dummy. Get yours today. Check it out.
Next question. We have voodoo.
Voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
Who do the voodoo that you
How
do?
you do the
You do voodoo, who do voodoo.
Hello,
Yeah.
Sifu Alex,
Hello.
Dre, and that British guy,
British guy.
Mikey.
Mikey.
Do the pole techniques come from
Hey now.
military spear techniques?
Uh-huh.
Also, if you were to add one more weapon into the WT system, what would it be?
Mhm.
If Dre is reading this, thank you for reading the question so eloquently. Respectfully, Voodoo. Yo, I
Wait,
did
no,
not
no,
make
wait,
this
whoa,
up.
whoa,
I did
whoa,
not
whoa.
make
Yeah.
this up.
You know what's funny? I read it because I took the question on Patreon. He actually did write that, by the way.
Wow.
So-
But it's obviously sarcasm because he knows that Dre's going to butcher it. Yeah. So, no, it did
That's
say that.
so
As well as
great.
like Dre normally adds a little bit of
Yeah.
like self
I guess you've seen the
flattering
episode or
bullshit at
two.
the end of the questions, but that was actually written.
Oh, that man's a real podcast fan to know. That's
I
a
can
deep
attest
cut
to
joke
that.
right
I can
there.
attest to
Fair
that.
play to him. Fair play to you.
So the problem with Chinese martial arts history, as we've discussed multiple times on this podcast and recently with the interviews with Jesper,
Mhm.
is that there is just a massive lack of primary sources on information, right? You could become a historian in all sorts of specializations, right? And, you know, professors of history often specialize in a certain time period, in a certain region of the world, in a certain region and time period, like ancient Greece, right?
Mm.
And then so, you know, they'll have like, obviously they'll have general historical knowledge, but then they usually specialize in something, right? And Jesper mentioned that, you know, no one could specialize in Chinese martial arts history because the problem is that the field, besides it not being lucrative, there's really nothing there. All right. Despite China's very long history of having a written record, that seemed to be mostly to military and other historical exploits, not specifically to the case of martial arts, most likely being because, you know, one of the historian's fallacies is to imprint local and modern mindset and modern way of thinking and mores and imprinting that into a past time period. And one of those things is literacy. The idea of more or less universal literacy across the population is a relatively new thing in world history. It was not it
Ah,
was not a given that in the 1800s in China you knew how to read. Who knew how to read? Obviously, people who are well
scholars.
educated and in the scholars, people who were in the government, they had to
Uh,
learn how to do that,
okay.
right? And then maybe some certain artisans. If you
Politicians.
were a farmer, all right,
Yeah.
if you worked like normal labor stuff, you did not need to know how to read. And
Not at all. Yeah.
guess who a majority of the people who are teaching Chinese martial arts, they were in that class. So
Uh,
despite the fact that China has a long historical record, many of the sifus within the various styles were most likely illiterate. That's why the stuff wasn't written down.
it's wild. My grandfather wasn't a big reader. He even told me like I'm not a good reader, but he had like a third grade education. He was a farmer all his life.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and but you imprint that 100 years ago and then
Yeah.
maybe, there would be even less education there, right?
Mm.
And then you go to other countries and other civilizations and universal literacy is a very very modern development, right? So that's why we think as modern sophisticated cosmopolitan individuals that yeah, of course, well people could read and they would have access to books and that would already be the first mistake. So there are very few primary documents when it comes to Chinese martial arts. There's some documents that are some people say are authenticated, but we don't know where these things come from. And also the problem is finding a document doesn't mean that what's in the document is true. And that's the other thing. That's also the other thing that people don't realize. They go, "Oh, well, there's a written record of this." Okay, there are written records of fairy tales, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, all right, which has flood myths and stuff that predate the biblical flood myths, all right, because it's written down. Is that actual history? No, because it turns out there's no actual record of a worldwide flood anywhere, right? So the thing is, the fact that something's written down, there are different genres of things that could be written down. Something could be fiction, something
Mm.
could be historical, something could be fiction put in an actual place that existed. All right, like I always say about Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man is from Queens, New York. But the
That
fact
makes
that
it
there's
real.
Queens, New York doesn't mean that there's a Spider-Man, right?
Oh man.
So
He lives up the block.
you have to understand that just because there's a document, first of all, the document could be forged. The document could be a lot more recent than you think it is. And even if the document was authentically written at that time, it could also be they could have also written fake shit.
Mm.
So it just happens that in Chinese martial arts, we have so few of even documents that might be fake that we have nothing to work with. So when we now come to the question of are the long pole techniques based on military spear techniques?
Mm.
Okay. There are people in Chinese martial arts who will say, yes, long pole fighting is based on. So when we're talking about long pole, we're talking about a pole that is at least 8 or 9 or 10 feet long. We're not talking about a shorter staff. We're usually talking about what's called Dan Tao Guan.
Dan Tao Guan.
Dan Tao Guan means single headed pole. And that
Mm.
means that you only use one end of it to hit. So when you have
Gotcha.
a really long pole, like a 9-foot long pole, especially when they're tapered, it's thicker on the end that you hold and thinner on the end that you hit with. That weapon is clearly not meant to be flipped around and turned around in your hands. Because first of all, if it's a rat-tailed pole, it's tapered.
Yeah.
You hold the heavier end and you hit with the thinner end. You wouldn't do it the other way. It would be awkward, right? So when you only hit with one side, it's called a single-headed pole.
Mhm.
And because of that construction, it has led many to believe, oh, that must be based on old Chinese lance or spear fighting. Lance just being a word for a long spear. Because if you have a spear, you have a spear tip on only one end. So you only use the one end to huck into your opponent.
Okay.
All right. and then you add in some kung fu movie stuff like the Yang family spear, right? Which was like a family of the Yang family. Everyone in the family learned how to use these special spear fighting techniques.
Or a
And
diagram.
well, then
Yeah.
you're jumping ahead.
Oh,
And then the story was that someone from the fifth brother of the Yang family spear dynasty, was like taken away in battle or left, or his other brothers were killed, and then he was left on the battlefield, or he went to a temple, and then they didn't let him use the spear tip, so he took the spear tip off, and then he had to modify all of his spear techniques to be in the pole because the monks wouldn't let him use a killing weapon. This is all like mythologized nonsense, mainly through movies like Eight Diagram Pole Fighter or whatever, right? So there's always been this kind of tacit connection that any kind of long pole, single head pole fighting where you're only using one is obviously based on spear fighting, because in spear fighting, especially lance, which is the longer spear, you're only going to use if I have a long ass spear with a dangerous tip at the end of it, why would I spin it around and hit you with the wood side, right? I'm going to hit you with the spear tip. Now, if I have a shorter spear, the more classic kung fu spear, I can use both ends because it's short enough that I could whip it around. I could spear you and maybe use the back end to block or to hit or whatever, but it would still be smarter to use the business end of the spear. But when you have a long ass lance, then it really doesn't make sense to spin that thing around and forego the business end of the lance, right? And that has led a lot of people to correlate that long pole fighting is most likely based on some kind of lance without a tip. Okay. And all I can say is I've heard that theory. It's actually when Sifu Leung Ting teaches the long pole, he postulates it as a potential origin. That supposedly long pole fighting comes from the Yang family spear without the spear tip. But he says according to hearsay. So he's not saying like this is what it is. All right. So the problem is that there are no real documents that are going to corroborate that or deconfirm that, right? So we can only make a connection because long spear, you only use the one end, long pole, you only use the one end. Now, there are styles of long pole where they do sometimes use both ends. I would argue that might not be the smartest tactic. If I have a 10-foot long pole, the advantage of that is the extreme size. Yeah. So if I choke up on that long pole and hold it midway, and then I use the back end to hit you like it's a bow staff, I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm not saying that there's not a context for it. I'm not saying that it's the dumbest thing in the world, but I've nullified the main advantage of that weapon, which is its reach. Yeah. You see what I mean? And when you're talking about weapons fighting, we're not talking about what looks cool. We're not talking about like a neat way of defending stuff that would look stylistic. We're not talking about like for choreography or for entertainment. We're talking about like for saving your life. Okay. If I have a lance, okay, I don't want to let you within any distance where you can get near me. I'm going to just keep stabbing the end of that thing into you. All right. So what I tend to believe is this. The Wing Chun long pole is as long as a lance is, and it's tapered. By the fact that it's tapered, it doesn't make sense that you then hold the thin end and then you have the floppy, heavy bit on the other side. That would make it very inaccurate. It would just be really weird. Yeah. And arguably, if you had very good power, you would break the pole in theory, right? So it makes sense. You hit with a thin end, you hold the thicker, more stabilized end, and you would keep the person more or less at bay using the end range of that weapon, either to spear or to hit with the side, but at the very end of it. Okay? Because why would I choke up, use the back end, and then nullify all the range, have the guy run in, grab my hand on the weapon, and now suddenly, what's the point of having the weapon? If someone has a long pole, they choke up on it, and then they try to hit you with the other end, and you were to just run in and catch it, and you hold on to the long pole, that long pole is toast. Yeah. Because
no more long pole.
Even if the guy doesn't have a weapon,
it's all short pole now.
Yeah, you don't want the guy to get past the end of the weapon, because once he's there, that weapon is useless. You want to keep him away. You want to keep him at bay. So while that has its parallel in lance fighting and spear fighting, we cannot say that, Therefore, these two things are doing it the same way. Therefore, they must be from the same source. It's just a matter of logic. I have a long ass pole that's tapered. What's the smartest way to use it? Keep you in front of me and don't let you get close.
Okay.
That's why the long pole only has a couple emergency maneuvers if the person gets past.
Does get close.
Yes.
Okay.
But that would be a failure of you doing what you should have done.
All
We
right.
do have some maneuvers like what do you do if the guy gets past the end of your weapon?
Footwork.
Yeah, obviously no, and even some maneuvers with the pole and stuff like that.
Okay.
But that would be like, a breach of what should normally happen. Okay. So I would be very wary to say, therefore, obviously, long pole fighting comes from spear tip fighting.
Mhm.
It's an argument that can be made, but it would be made at the expense of not having any real justifiable evidence to support it. And any claim that can be made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So we can't say. There are no written records about where Lokdin Bunguan comes from. We know through hearsay that the Lokdin Bunguan was originally with the left hand, was designed to fight it, the right-handed Mlong Pagwa Guan. It's a very specific pole style designed to fight against the more common pole style of the South. But nowadays, most people who do Lokdin Bunguan don't have a specific lead, so even that is kind of missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the theory of it coming from the boat, because of the actual way that the
Yeah,
the
so that
boat
is
oar
yet
looks.
just another hearsay, right?
Mhm.
So when, during the so-called red boat period,
Right.
all right, you had these travel, these traveling operas.
Yeah.
And why was that significant? Because a lot of people supposedly who were hiding from the Qing government were hiding as actors on these opera boats because they would be moving from town to town, traveling on all these different rivers, and they wouldn't be in one place for too long, which would mean that if you were someone who was doing anti-government activity and the
Hmm.
government was looking for you
Yeah.
in rural agrarian Qing dynasty China, probably the best thing for you to do is to keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you stay in the same place and someone recognizes you, whispers to the other guy, they're going to come and get you. If, in the days before photos and all that stuff, the easiest way to stay safe is to not be anywhere for too long. So you work on in an opera troupe.
Mm.
Maybe you're just the guy who's putting up the sets and putting down the sets. Maybe you're an actor, whatever. So that's supposedly but again, a lot of that also sounds somewhat mythologized. I'm not
All
saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying this is what we're told by hearsay. But we don't have hard primary sources that this is actually exactly what was happening, right? Now, the boats that the opera groups would travel on were called junks.
Yes.
Junks are flat bottom boats. They're flat bottom so that they can also go into shallow waters. All right.
Mm.
Likewise, they're generally not meant to go out on the open sea because you don't want a flat bottom boat out in the open sea. You need something with a keel. All right. So these would be boats that would be mostly going down rivers.
Okay.
And in order to move them, the guy in the back, the poler, moves and pushes it using
Forward.
that very long pole, right?
Uh-huh.
You have the sails, but like you move it out. You don't have an outboard motor or an inboard motor. It's the guy in the pole, and then supposedly, the right-handed. It was the right-handed side, right? So you held it here, and you were using the right hand to push the pole that way there, right, and then move it and steer it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So there's something that, the guy, Leung Yitai, was a poler of the red junk. Okay, but do we really know that? Okay. I mean, yes, everyone says, yeah, no, it's in this book. Yeah, but again, the fact that it's in a book doesn't mean it's true. The fact that something is well subscribed to doesn't mean it's true.
Mhm.
99% of the Wing Chun people can say, yeah, Leung Yitai was a poler from, or Wong Hua Bo was a poler from the red junk or whatever. They can all say it, but until they provide a photograph, until they provide a document, until they provide that, they're just saying that because someone else said that, okay? And the plural of anecdotes does not equal data. And that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius, hit that bell for notifications, support us on Patreon or right here with YouTube memberships, or just give us a badass one-time donation or multiple-time donation
Yeah.
through PayPal. The link is in the description below. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea kung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
1, 2, 3, clap. All right, fantastical. Here we go.
What?
All right.
Wrapped in testicle.
What was my third one?
What
was my third one?
Third one.
Andrew, you can edit this out.
Third one was
What the hell was my third one? Oh, boxing. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Here we go.
just straight up
Cut all that
boxing,
shit out, Andrew.
Straight up striking.
Anyway, before we go forward, I just wanted to just discuss junks. So you're saying that your junk goes into shallow waters and it's flat underneath?
God.
Just where you don't go out into the open sea, but you need to rudder yourself in?
Oh, goodness.
Why does everything that's said with that ridiculous accent sound
Sound.
sexually suggestive?
All right, peeps. I was about to nail that
No,
one take.
you weren't. But you're gonna nail this one. All right, go nail it, Dre.
You got this.
Nail those eggs onto the wall.
Caviars.
Ride
All
that
right.
junk into shallow waters.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of questions from the Patreons. Lots.
Nonsense.
I thought we was going with questions. You said questions, so hot nonsense.
I said the first time. The second time I said hot nonsense.
my
I
bad.
corrected
My
myself.
business.
Yeah.
My business.
Unlike some people, I'm allowed to course correct.
It's much harder to course correct on a junk in a sea because they're meant for
He's
shallow
not gonna
waters.
let this. He's not gonna let this junk go.
He's not allowed.
Yeah.
Not
He
letting
loves
you-
Not gonna let
holding
his
on to
junk go
junk.
either.
Yeah.
He's holding on to that
Yeah.
junk.
Yeah.
All right, peeps. Stop, Mikey. I know what you're doing. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from the Patreons. Lots of gems. Lots of long-ass polls. Is that it?
You
Long-ass
did it
polls?
fine.
We're doing what?
Jesus,
Yes.
why'd you stop?
Lots of long-ass polls. And lots of, hey, if you're hitting plateaus on your training, I've got some advice for you. If you can't pocket, book it. And if you can't book it, fuck it. Let's get to it. No!
Yeah, that in there kind of.
Yeah, janky.
It was a little
Swanky.
janky.
It's a little junky.
It needs to be a little
Smooth.
smooth. All right, like yeah,
Like the undercarriage of a junk.
Yeah,
Like a
gee.
smooth operator or a smooth criminal.
Hey, you know that song is about me, right? Smooth Operator.
Yeah.
Sade wrote that after we broke up.
Lots of long ass polls. Lots of, hey man, I got some advice for you. If you no, we're supposed to go first with the other part.
So close.
Lots of gems. Oh wait, no, you know that's not how you started. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius. Stop, man.
I like how he says obvious stuff to himself that we all know and he should know,
No,
but he
no,
says it like it's a revelation.
no.
Oh, that's not how we normally
No, it's
start
not
it.
how we
Yes,
normally
we know.
start All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius. Wait, what? All right.
All right.
Well
Yes.
played.
Well played.
For one take, Jake. Woo!